Hi, Hunter Hastings here. At the Value Creators, we see an entrepreneurial future. More entrepreneurial opportunities for individuals, for teams, for medium-sized companies, for big companies, and even the largest companies. We see opportunities more distributed than they currently are because there'll be more opportunity for all. Why do we say this? Well, partly because of the brilliant individual initiatives that we know that people will take, and partly because of the trends in technology, which will enable entrepreneurship in an entirely new way, making technological augmentation of individuals more and more available to everyone.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
It's happening now. We operate in what our guest Kartik Gada calls the accelerating technonomic medium, ATOM for short. He's a futurist, he's a hedge fund manager. In fact, he would say that the hedge fund manages itself. It's AI directed and it beats all of the index funds without any human intervention. He's also a CFO and a chief economist at multiple AI firms, and he's an instructor at Stanford University in the new economics of disruptive technologies. Kartik, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's a real pleasure for us. You're a futurist. I think you use that word to describe yourself, and you help us all think about the technological future and the economic future, which are thoroughly and inextricably linked, of course. You talk about the new economics of advanced technology. So we're interested to hear about that. You've got a famous book. The acronym is ATOM, the Accelerating Technomic Medium. And I think you published that in 2016 or 2017, but it's constantly updated because it's a living book on the web. We're about entrepreneurship, so I'm going to start off by asking you about what you say in the book. Technological progress and the associated deflation, we'll cover that, will be far more favorable to entrepreneurship, and we can harness new technologies into a vehicle of broadly increased human prosperity. So I love that. I'm all about the entrepreneurial society and the entrepreneurial future. So let's start there. What's your vision of the future of entrepreneurship?
Well, ultimately, there'll be an ever-expanding type of entrepreneurship, as we know, but all technological disruption creates new opportunities for entrepreneurs because everyone worries about, is automation taking away jobs or is AI displacing workers? But I say the one profession that never, ever, ever gets displaced or rendered obsolete is that of the entrepreneur, because every technological disruption that lowers the cost of something or makes a human redundant for a certain task is simultaneously free money for the entrepreneur in a way. I have a number of charts and block diagrams to explain this, but anything that automates away a job makes a certain type of company that could not have become profitable before profitable, because for the same revenue stream, you have lower costs, therefore a faster profitability. And this process is not new. It's been ongoing for some centuries, but now it's much faster with the accelerated technology that we're experiencing in so many fronts, thereby enabling an ever-widening variety of businesses to emerge.
Yeah, I like to think of it as the market is your employer. It's the employer for all of us, and entrepreneurs are the best employees for the market. So when I think of that future, I don't have your expertise in technology, Kartik, but I think of a couple of things. One is structure, that the economic structure is very distorted right now with a few big corporations and lots of single employer companies, and then what we derisively call small and medium enterprises in the middle. I expect that structure to change and become more distributed. And the second thing I think about is eliminating all the barriers to value creation. I included that bureaucracy and financialization and some other things. So I'm sure your vision is a little bit different, but just comment on those. Will we see a big change in economic structure?
Well, Here's the thing. The natural tendency is towards leveling, meaning that new ventures, which start out small, but if they're fast growing, they become a medium-sized business, and some fortunate few become a big company. The natural inclination is towards more of those and more decentralized power. However, the counter force is that the nation state and government as a whole always wants to grow itself beyond its original scope. And as government gets bigger, it's easier for a big corporation to take the easy way out and rig the regulation in its favor rather than compete in the free market. And that's why you have, the 7, 8 big tech companies accruing all the power versus the natural decentralization. So you have these two forces combating each other. The natural inclination towards more leveling and a level playing field and entrepreneurship on the edges versus the increasing benefit or ease of just rigging the regulation in your favor by working with the government if you're a big enough entity to do so. And that's why big corporations do less and less innovation, because it's easier to just hire lobbying firms and rig rules rather than innovate on product.
So do you see a resolution to that? Will the entrepreneurship and decentralization overcome the centralization and regulation, or vice versa, or will it just stay in equilibrium?
Eventually, the entrepreneurship should win out, but that process is turbulent because government does not want to shrink of its own accord. One problem that arises is that we thought there would be competition among nation states, but instead what we are seeing is they form a cartel of governance. Entrepreneurs should have the ability to link with other entrepreneurs as a countervailing force. So while the natural megatrends, the first principles, if you will, are on the side of the entrepreneur, the governments have the power to keep on growing without any counterbalancing force in the short term. So eventually the entrepreneurs and then trend toward decentralization will win, but that process could be turbulent because governments don't want to give up power voluntarily.
Well, there's a couple of things that might favor the entrepreneurial side. One is the network. So more and more hierarchy is replaced with network, more and more redundant bureaucracy and regulation can be advanced or can be worked around, shall we say, by the network. And the second, which I'm sure we'll get to, is AI. So is the network future? Will that stop the government from its concentration?
That is something we continue to hope for, but 20 years ago, a lot of people thought that would have happened by now, right? The government can consume more and more resources because the accelerating gradient of economic growth has enabled a level of deficit spending far more than what was thought possible, which is how government can continue to grow without collapsing itself right now. And therefore, it is crowding out more and more aspects of society in that sense. So that is how it can continue to grow in that sense.
So one of the implications also that you talk about in Atom and you've talked about in your YouTube channel, Kartik, is the emergence of new business models. And I presume that's where we overlap with AI. But tell us what you're thinking about then. What should we be thinking about in terms of new business models?
There's a couple ways to look at this. Now, with these capabilities of tools, some people have created successful businesses entirely on social media, for example. They're influencers and they make a lot of money. Some people can produce software with smaller and smaller teams and distribute it instantaneously on the web, so small teams can make a lot of money. And AI falls within that category and enhances all of the above, because you can potentially create the same revenue stream with fewer and fewer people. So the size of team you need to be competitive against a larger entity continues to shrink. In a simple sense, let's say an entrepreneur can use AI to do the work of 4 people. A revenue stream that would have taken 4 people to build, he can do by himself. Then he can keep all that money for himself as well. So AI is a supercharger in that sense. And I even give a numerical example. Let's say you have a $3 million revenue stream, and in the past you needed $4 million of cost to build that. That's not really a viable business, because 3 minus 4 is minus 1 million loss. It never gets to profit. But with AI, you can have the same $3 million revenue stream, but if that $4 million a year of cost could be shrunk to 2 million a year due to 50% automation. So then 3 minus 2 is plus 1 million. And what was a loss-making concept is now profitable through the use of AI. And more importantly, the first example would not have been done, and the second example would be done because it is a profitable business. What an individual or small team can do is now so much more, and the path to profitability, it can be so much faster due to fewer people needed to create the same revenue stream.
So, Kartik, that's really exciting that we call it entrepreneurs choosing their costs. So you generate the value, which is customers paying the revenue. That's your 3 million, and you choose your costs. That's how you get to profitability. But the other thing you point out that we should all be thinking about as entrepreneurs is the other side of that is more and more industries are arriving at their point where disruption is possible by entrepreneurial innovation. Tell us about that in principle, and then let's talk about a couple of industries that might have arrived at that point.
Okay, so thinking about it in a very macro sense, economic growth is accelerating. And even though humanity began, let's say Homo sapiens, maybe 100,000 years ago, some say earlier, even just the Stone Age, Bronze Age, so that was 5,000 years ago, Bronze Age, maybe 4,000, 3,000 years ago. But economic growth was still virtually zero on a per year basis. It was more on a per century basis that there was any visible growth until about 1500 AD. Even then, it was a fraction of 1% a year. Then by 1800, 1%. Then in the 20th century, 2 to 3%. And that is what we see now. But that gradient continues to rise because of continuous technological feedback loops. Now, within that, there is what I call the tip of the spear, which is high tech, and what we call high tech today, not what was high tech 150 years ago, such as just electricity or the earliest automobiles or telephones, but what is high tech today? I define high tech as something that has 10% a year or greater exponential improvement for the same cost. So semiconductor chips, softwares, things like that. And that is becoming a larger and larger percentage of the economy that's high tech. I say right now it's 3.5%, soon to go to 4%. It took all of human history to get to 0.5% in 2000. And then that doubled again to 1% by around 2008, doubling to 2% by 2016, doubling to 4% now in 2024, 25, let's say. And as more of the economy gets fused into high tech, you not only get faster growth, but then more and more industries can get disrupted because there's no place immune to this effect of high tech. I say there's a saying that I have: you may not be interested in technology, but technology is interested in you. And that can be seen as very positive. You can make much more money from doing that, or negative. If you really like the status quo and you like things to stay unperturbed for decades on end, then that's not going to be much of an option anymore either.
So at the micro level, you expressed that thought at the macro level. One example that we think of, and you've written about as well, is education, higher education especially. It's the expense of getting certainly an advanced degree has become very, very expensive. It's not highly distributed. The cost of distributing knowledge or transferring knowledge is becoming lower and lower, and yet their cost is becoming higher and higher. You have a great chart about the comparison of streaming a degree from Harvard online versus streaming Netflix, which it illustrates the problem.
Exactly how people should look at it, because during the pandemic, some of this got exposed in that students had to be in quarantine. Universities said, we will have the classes over Zoom, but you have to pay the full fee, or the default assumption was that the fee should be the same. And then many people, including me, noticed that, wait a minute, what we have on Netflix for an extremely low price is extremely good, and a huge variety of content. On YouTube, there is so much educational material, and it's virtually free if you watch ads, and you can pay for the ad-free version, which is also inexpensive. So that's problem number one, this dissemination of education, the duplication of education. So even earlier than universities, we can take schools. So today happens to be Tuesday, and let's say 11-year-old children who are in sixth grade, sixth standard, are being taught mathematics today as we speak. The English-speaking world alone has 1 million schools with 1 million teachers teaching the same thing on the same day. sixth grade mathematics, sixth standard, to 11-year-old children. Think about the duplication inherent to that. So this is not like the topmost elite education like Stanford Business School or Harvard Law School or something like that. There's certainly some value. That's a small fraction of all students in education. The real volume is in these schools and classrooms and ordinary universities, ordinary degrees, where just the duplication is tremendous and it's wasteful. And why should universities be getting more and more expensive? We know that there's so much bureaucratic bloat and corruption in that, when information dissemination, as Hunter, you correctly pointed out, is getting cheaper and cheaper, not to mention that most people in society agree that if we get more people to higher levels of education, our prosperity would rise. So to gouge people at the time of education would seem very counterproductive to that. I can give so many examples. Including myself, like I did a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and I finished one semester early. I could have gotten a second bachelor's degree in economics because my minor was economics. And that was long before I had a different opinion about economics degrees, but I could have gotten a second bachelor's degree for one semester more, but I would have had to pay one semester more. So I didn't do that because it was not incremental to my resume. And a lot of people are faced with that decision. And that's why the cost creates a rush factor and also a desire to do the bare minimum because you need that credential on your resume to get a job versus more education. And in an information-based age, this type of siloing and scarcity-based model for education seems very wrong. Coming back to the video analogy to tell you how strange this is. So even in the 21st century, as recently as 2006, let's say, to watch a film, you would go there, rent the DVD or VHS cassette, come back home, watch the film. Hopefully it was good. If it was not good, then you don't watch the whole thing, but you still have to return the DVD or cassette. So that's 4 trips to the store. Do you know how many such video rental stores there were in 2006 in the United States? There were 9,044. 9,044 such stores. And now there's almost zero. There's only one that's somewhat of a museum or something. Because all this Netflix and all that was the natural progression of technology, dematerialization, all that information dissemination. The same must become true for education. All market forces and every logical assessment of an education paradigm has to move in that direction, right? And so that should happen. The institutional rigidity and the practice of requiring this bachelor's degree under the premise that this bundled amount of education called the bachelor's degree signifies a correlation to knowledge. All of these are assumptions built into our legacy system. But then once that domino effect falls, it falls heavily. There's also legal reasons that this persists because you cannot do aptitude testing due to certain legal cases in the United States in the 1960s and 70s, like Griggs versus Duke Power and all that, that got rid of aptitude tests for employment. And that's why this dependence on college degrees, which has created a rush into degrees because you cannot get, there's a whole category of jobs you cannot get without the degree, whether the degree has any correlation to one's actual knowledge or not.
Yeah. Is that one of those instances, Kartik, where the barrier is the role of government versus the role of entrepreneurs? Is something of either a government monopoly on education at the lower levels and certainly a cartel at the higher levels? Is that one of those instances where we need entrepreneurs to move around government?
It's part of it because when a legal case gets set in case law, Griggs versus Duke Power, see, that can exist for good reasons at the time, but that's how all this test-based hiring, which would be more practical for regular employers, got done away with. But at the same time, there's corporate level practices that ones are unwilling to move away from. Now, we've seen a list of corporations that say they don't require a college degree to get jobs, and Google is one of them, and a few other prestigious employers are among those, but it's not going wholesale in terms of that practice because there's too many people who have memorized that they must only hire someone with a degree versus not.
Isn't it true, though, that companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon are doing a lot of internal training themselves? They take the products of the universities, or even now I understand they're hiring pre-university from high school, and they do the training internally. They do the knowledge transfer and the skill development internally.
that is a very good step that should become more widespread, because if someone like Google just hired the topmost 18-year-old high school graduates who could get into top universities and just put them into a modern version of apprenticeship, I would say by 4 years later, they will know much more about how to be a successful corporate employee than spending 4 years in a university. Plus, they're getting paid, even if it's a low salary. $25,000 a year is still quite good for an 18-year-old versus debt of university expense. So I mean, this is a big improvement relative to that. So that apprenticeship model, at least for the better students, works very well. And without these better students in universities would collapse substantially, because a lot of their premise is that they have the best students and that everyone else should go there because the best ones are there and just to be in proximity of the best.
Right. And it's conceivable that some entrepreneur could do that for the small and medium enterprises too, find some kind of centralized or syndicated way of doing that so that they can all hire the top 18-year-olds.
Yeah, and just a form of certification as a potential thing. Like if you take these 3 classes, it could be through a website like Udemy or Udacity or something like that. Then you are qualified in software if you've done these 3, and that should suffice for, let's say, software type work, or if you're qualified in accounting or something like that, whatever the various entry-level disciplines of a corporate job are. It should be that way, and market forces are in that direction, aside from just this institutional rigidity and government practices, including case law in the United States. That's why I'm more optimistic of this disruption originating outside the United States and then disrupting from outside, because there's many countries, even big countries, that don't have a university that is as good as a top 10 or 15 US universities. So that's why so many of their students leave their country to just go on student visas and all that. So more access to their country would create that expertise locally, and they can still immigrate and all that. But then you don't have this scarcity-based model that seems very artificial in the modern age.
So education is one industry that seems ripe for disruption. Do you have another one in your sights, Kartik? I know a lot of people talk about entertainment, for example.
Entertainment has undergone the very big disruption that I described earlier, which was in distribution. It is now there's more in terms of actors and lower budget creation of films and things like that. So that's already much further along. The one I think has the bigger opportunity because of more institutional resistance that was preventing it until now is medicine. Now, consider various factors. We've all seen these articles where 79% of patients prefer ChatGPT over their normal doctor. And why is that? Because ChatGPT answers unlimited questions and they're not trying to get rid of you for the next patient. And that's just reason number 1. Reason number 2 is no appointment and other access. Access is 24 hours a day. It could be a holiday. It could be 11 p.m. at night. You can still access the AI doctor, on top of the fact that there's cost and insurance considerations and even a time consideration. One thing that's true everywhere in the world is that to see your doctor for 10 minutes, you have to spend 2 hours. You have to go there, come back. You have to do in the waiting room, fill out the form. Seeing your doctor for 10 minutes takes 2 hours. Whereas with an AI-based solution, then you get rid of all these associated costs and other friction points. And will it be 100% accurate? No, but the doctor isn't 100% accurate either. So the AI, there's a good chance that the AI could be better. Secondly, that duplication aspect I spoke about earlier certainly applies here. Suppose there were a virus going around, nothing too serious, but sore throat people have. Let's say 20 million people have sore throat. What happens in the old model? 20 million people make 20 million doctor's appointments to all be told the same thing. Tremendous duplication, right? Whereas if everything was on an AI-based model, just access to the PC, then all that duplication is eliminated because they're going to the same source and that source can talk to multiple people at once, versus 20 million people making 20 million doctor's appointments and going there and coming back and taking up the whole system. So these are all things that people in the future will find funny about our time, about how inefficient all of this was.
And this is a system development, right, Kartik? I mean, we've just got to let it evolve. It will evolve. We have to let it.
We have to let it evolve. Many people are doing it already to an indirect degree. Because, for example, the amount of health information online is a lot. Now, it's perhaps too complicated for the average person, but the more inclined person can learn a lot. And many people have cured a variety of conditions on their own just by knowing this type of dietary change, or this type of treatment, which could be natural, very low cost, or easily accessible. They just didn't know exactly what thing would work, fixes their problem. Most pharmaceuticals are just something that some plant in nature already does. It's just been reverse engineered to a pill because a lot of people don't know that this plant does this certain thing. And then the pharmaceutical companies charge 50 times more.
Let's make a switch to this question of deflation, technological deflation. You're very famous for the cases you've made on that. Your YouTube channel is famous. We'll link to it in our show notes, Kartik. But you say there's going to be a new source, a new flow of monetary energy. I think that's your word, and monetary resources in the future. And that's going to be positive for entrepreneurs in some of the ways that we've talked about. But explain your basic underlying vision for people who maybe haven't watched you on YouTube and seen your writings and haven't read Atom yet. Just quickly explain it for us.
The rate of economic progress is accelerating, and the speed of technological change is accelerating. One first has to accept that, or at least believe that that is the case. If not, I have other materials for that. But as long as people accept that, then one has to see what technology is. Any technological change is usually a cost reduction for a solution. Either an existing solution becomes much cheaper, or something becomes cheaper to the extent that there was no solution before and now there is a practical solution. In that sense, every technological change puts a certain amount of deflation into the economy. It puts it in a general sense, and then entrepreneurs gather up these individual instances of deflation to create new technology-based businesses and new wealth. Now, without money printing from the central bank, this deflation would be pervasive throughout the economy, and then we would have overall net deflation in the economy, which is quite bad because we have a debt-based system. Had a different system emerged going back to the 17th century built on deflation, that may not have been the case. But since we have a debt-based system, deflation is bad. A lot of people think deflation is good because their understanding of deflation is that they would just pay less for things. But they don't realize, well, then your employer will pay less for things by not giving you a job either, right? And debt payments stay the same. So if your income goes down, deflation is the most frightening thing in the world. Whereas inflation, moderate inflation, is favorable because your income's rising, but your debt payments, mortgage or student loan debt or whatever, stays the same. Therefore, this money printing is there to offset this technological deflation, because left unchecked, it would be a negative force. But instead, by filling this gap, the amount of money that can be printed without aberrantly high inflation rises exponentially in proportion to this number, to the amount of technology. And this is something that is not understood by formal economists, but it exists in the modern age because of the nature of technology. I'll explain it in another way. As more portions of the economy become knowledge-based, meaning dematerialized and software-heavy, but even things like semiconductor chips, etc., are knowledge-based product because their entire value is knowledge, and a very small fraction of 1% is the materials. That means that demand can be met to a degree of infinity without any supply shortage. Software, if someone buys software, they're downloading it from online. There's no inventory, there's no shipping, there's no supply shortage, so it never runs out. Therefore, demand for that can be infinity. No matter how many people buy that piece of software, the price does not rise, and there's never a shortage. If 10 million more people sign up for Netflix tomorrow, Netflix's price doesn't rise because there's no inventory that's depleted, right? So that's why demand for these types of products can be catered to infinity without inflation. Now, they're not the entirety of the economy, of course, but they're becoming a larger share of the economy, 3.5% to 4%. And that's why the amount of money printing that can be done without inflation, the total economy, is rising, because this portion, this high-tech portion, is growing as a percentage, thereby ingesting more of this monetary creation into real wealth generation rather than inflation.
And as you pointed out earlier, it's going to become a bigger and bigger percentage of the economy as time goes on. So,
Yeah, and it's rising geometrically because those numbers I gave before were doubling 0.5%, 1%, 2%, 4%. We're almost up to 4% now. It took thousands of years of human history to get to 0.5%. And now in only 24 more years, for 3 doublings, because it doubles every 8 years or so in my estimation, to go from 0.5 to 4. By the time it gets to 50% of the economy, which I estimate for the 2060s, so only 40 years from now, maybe a little less than that, then we have what many people call a technological singularity. My definition of a technological singularity is of this economic nature. And that's when we're almost at infinite economic prosperity under today's measurements of it, because more than 50% of the economy is high tech. And that will happen well within the lifetimes of many people alive today.
a couple of implications there, maybe short-term ones. I'm thinking there'd be a different relationship between corporations, especially the new digital corporations, and let's call it the financial sector. You won't need a stock market. You won't need the kind of artificial relationships that you have now. The financialization, as some call it. Is that how you see it?
It's not that the stock market necessarily needs to go away or should, because that is how a corporation can connect with the public or individual investor money. That is not the obstruction to any of this process. And that's why we see these stock market indices rising higher and higher. Even now, there's an all-time high every day, it seems. And even if there's a correction, the gradient has fundamentally increased. We can see that. Where the problem actually is the government in terms of its assumptions around fiscal behavior, because I say that this technological deflation is large enough that proper monetization of it, which is not complicated, it's actually a big simplification relative to what we have now, can fund government and the governance function without taxation of humans. And in a more simple sense, we see all these headlines about how AI will take 40% of jobs or disrupt 44% of jobs, which is not only not true, but if one believes that 40% of existing work is displaceable by AI and all that, then the question becomes, well, shouldn't AI be the one paying income tax then rather than humans, right? If AI is doing 40% of the work, it should pay 40% of the taxes. But I say a small shift could make all the work that AI do generate the income tax, and then you have a gradual reduction of taxation on humans because AI does not work less when it's taxed the way humans might.
Yeah, that's a dramatic difference, and it paints a very different future. But a government's going to be able to either get in the way of that. Will they understand it? How will they adapt?
If they wanted to do this transition, it would be very easy. I even lay out the detailed steps of how to do it in a gradual way so as to not cause any missteps or hiccups, and the very gradual incremental way to do it. They're not willing to do that for multiple reasons. One is it would be some reduction of their power. They would get more money, of course, but they don't have as much power over the citizenry as exists under an income tax model. Secondly, they are being advised by very orthodox people who have studied textbooks from 60 or 70 years ago, where they still believe that more money supply automatically creates inflation because the concept of software or knowledge-based businesses that I mentioned does not exist. Therefore, they say more money always causes inflation, even though they don't see this inflation showing up. They just memorize the textbook that says that that's true. And therefore, it's still their belief that the existing system has to be what it is forever. Now, there's many ways to counter that, too, because the United States had no income tax until 1913, 111 years ago. There was no income tax. We did have a judicial system, universities, military, and shipping and interstate commerce. We had all of those things then without income tax. The one thing we did not have is the welfare state. That's the only thing the income tax pays for. It doesn't pay for roads and bridges and all the things people say that their taxes pay for, because we had those things before income tax. So if one goes even further back, you could make the stronger case for what I'm saying, because now when you have this software-based output, you can add the welfare state as funded by AI. Think of what the technology industry has demonstrated. So many things are free, or at worst, you have to watch ads for them. Google search is free. YouTube is free if you watch ads. ChatGPT has a free version. Netflix is $8 a month. All these things are free or very low cost that the tech industry has delivered. Yet every interaction with the government is very expensive. In California, if you have an average car, your annual license plate registration for average car is $300 a year. What do you get? You just get the sticker and the proof of registration. Now, that is simultaneously true in a world as where ChatGPT is free and YouTube is free. All the wonderful things you can do with all of those tools are free. Yet the car sticker is $300 a year. This gap is so huge that at some point the difference becomes untenable. How can government give you so little for so much money? That question must arise. In California, if you want an LLC, the annual fee is $800 a year just for the LLC tax. It is quite crazy on that front. And at some point, you can't have a government where the productivity and the value for money is so much lower than the myriad of technological products that already exist. More people will notice. Just like that university chart versus Netflix cost, the same thing is virtually any tech product versus cost of government services, right?
I hope we realize that very quickly.
I hope so. And it's technologically and economically very, very possible. It's just not politically possible.
One of the implications that you mentioned this before, but let's cover it again in this thinking about the supply of money. You say not only will there be a lower net cost of entrepreneurship, but VC funding will flow more freely to entrepreneurs, and the timeline to realization for VC firms will shorten. So that whole cycle will improve, right? Better flows in, better flows out.
Yes, because it will take less to build certain types of companies. There will still be companies that require a lot of funding before revenue, but there will be more and more businesses that become viable with less funding, and therefore faster exit. Plus, the accelerating rate of change means that for those that are successful, the time it takes to go from 0 to 1 billion was a pretty big success, but the timeline of that is already shortening as well. So this VC repeat cycle can speed up considerably, and that would keep increasing the amount of money and the feedback loop of entrepreneurship on top of funding sources that are outside of VCs, because VCs are also creating their own monopoly or oligopoly in a certain way, a certain cartel that other financing sources are not able to break into. But when it costs less to be an entrepreneur, then more types of funding become viable, creating more competition for these legacy VCs with more types of funding for innovation.
Yeah, it's a beautiful prospect. You say we'll all have unprecedented opportunity to monetize our special individual skills. Adam Smith called it our individual genius. The division of labor will become more and more detailed. We'll each find our specialty and we'll be able to indulge that specialty, yeah?
Yes, and more economic complexity, because this has already been going on for centuries and now it's kicking into higher gears. If you go back, let's say 2 to 3 centuries, there were very few professions for most people. Men could do maybe 4 things. Four professions were available to men and only 2 available to women, let's say. So there's very few things you could do. Military, agriculture, handicrafts, metalworking, 3, 4, those were the choices. People like us would not have been good at any of those things, probably, right? So, I mean, there was no knowledge-based economy. Now you can pursue a variety of other things. You can have a secondary activity. One can have their normal job, which is knowledge-based. It could be in something high-tech. One can also do other activities, such as social media activities, YouTube, podcasts, everything like the above. It's easier to write books by using AI. Some people are using AI to create screenplays, short films, all kinds of other things. There's just a huge opportunity to do all of these because a person can do more and more by themselves, including produce music and everything, versus dealing with band members and all that. You can do more by yourself. And so economic complexity rises and more individual talents could be discovered and utilized. I even think of it this way. A lot of people who are celebrities today, entertainment celebrities, the same people 200 years ago would have been poor because there was no market for their talent, so it was never discovered. And what would they do, right? You could be a minstrel somewhere, but that's still a life of poverty and it's nothing. And the variety of things people are good at. Professional athletes, when did that begin? That didn't begin until the modern era, right? That a professional athlete could make a lot of money. that a musician could make a lot of money because post the song online, it can be bought on iTunes or Spotify. If the song is good, everyone finds out. The song meets its audience automatically. You don't have to do additional marketing. And so all these barriers are gone, so all these specialized talents can find a role in the marketplace. They say the market is the employer.
Yep. Well, I'm taking away a very optimistic scenario. Is that the way we should see it?
Mostly, yes. However, criminals can use technology in a variety of ways too. We see news every day about how some hackers did a deep fake of some executive and stole a lot of money from a company, and these numbers are rising too. $20 million, $30 million, because they went through the trouble of doing deep fakes of the CEO and CFO of a company with the entire goal of targeting that company and tricking the employees into thinking the CEO made them do something. So criminals are becoming more creative implementers of these technologies, and the variety of crimes is rising as well. Now, crime fighting gets enhanced, law enforcement gets enhanced with technology too, but they have to be industrious and adaptable enough to stay ahead of the criminals. Right now, criminals are more proactive users of AI than law enforcement is.
Well, good, Kartik. Thank you. We'll send people to your YouTube channel and to Atom. Is there anywhere else that you'd like us to link to?
Those are the two primary areas, certainly.
Good. Well, thank you so much for today. And as I said, I'm going to leave with a very optimistic point of view. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode, and check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.